Groom voice loud, cruel, addressing the crowd. Stop the music. The wedding march cuts off abruptly. Silence falls. Naomi confused, heart sinking. Evan? What's? Groom laughing, turning to 300 guests. You all think I'm going through with this? Marrying her? Gasps. Phones lift instantly. Groom, voice dripping with contempt. Look at her. My father forced this merger, but I have standards. I won't marry someone this fat and pathetic. Naomi voice breaking, barely a whisper. Please don't. Guest whispered, but loud enough. Oh my God, is this really happening? Groom, smirking at his groomsmen. I'd rather die alone than. Deep male voice, from the back, cutting through like a blade. That can be arranged. Every head whips around. The room goes dead silent. Naomi internal, tears streaming. That voice, it wasn't loud. But everyone stopped breathing. Stranger, Korean accent, each word lethal and controlled. Step away from her. Now. Groom nervous laugh turning. Who the hell are you? Stranger, walking down the aisle, eyes locked on Naomi. Your worst mistake. Evan's father goes pale. Men in suits look terrified. Stranger, reaching the altar, voice soft but deadly. She's no longer yours to humiliate. Groom, trying to sound tough. And what are you going to do about it? Stranger, wiping a tear from Naomi's cheek, ignoring him completely. I'm going to marry her. Today. Right now. He turns to the crowd. Stranger, voice calm, absolute authority. Anyone who objects can leave. Anyone who posts footage will regret it. Anyone who speaks of this, well. He smiles. It's terrifying. Stranger, to Naomi, voice suddenly gentle. I've been waiting 6 months for this moment. Say yes and you'll never be hurt again. Naomi stunned, barely breathing. I don't even know you. Stranger, eyes intense, possessive. You will. I'm Han Seojin. And you're mine now. Hello lovelies. Welcome to Afro-Korean Story Vault, the hub of great stories. If you're already hooked, hit that subscribe button right now. You need to see what happens next. This story gets absolutely wild. Now let's continue. The white roses in Naomi Carter's hands trembled so violently, she thought the petals might scatter across the polished marble floor. She'd spent 6 months preparing for this moment. 6 months of dress fittings and seating charts and tasting menus that all felt like elaborate set dressing for a play she never auditioned for. 6 months convincing herself that arranged marriages could work, that corporate mergers built on wedding vows could transform into something real, that Evan Hale would eventually see her as more than a line item on a contract. She'd been catastrophically, painfully wrong. Evan stood at the altar in his custom Tom Ford suit, but he hadn't looked at her once since she'd walked down that endless aisle on her father's arm. He'd been checking his phone throughout the entire ceremony, scrolling through messages, his jaw tight with barely concealed irritation, like he was trapped in a tedious business meeting instead of his own wedding. The officiant droned on about love and commitment and sacred bonds. Naomi's fingers ached from gripping the bouquet. Her dress, a custom creation that had taken 3 months to design and cost more than a luxury car, suddenly felt like a straitjacket. Too tight. Too heavy. Too much. When the officiant asked if anyone objected to the union, silence fell over the 300 guests packed into the cathedral. Naomi exhaled shakily. Almost done. Just a few more minutes of this performance, and maybe once the cameras stopped flashing and the audience dispersed, Evan would relax. Maybe he'd try. Maybe she could make this work through sheer force of will and optimism. Then Evan laughed. It was a short, bitter sound that sliced through the reverent quiet like a knife through silk. Sharp. Cool. Deliberate. Naomi's head snapped toward him, her carefully maintained composure cracking. His expression was cold. Detached. Contemptuous. The look someone gives a telemarketer who called during dinner. I don't want her, he said, loud enough for the first 3 rows to hear clearly. Time seemed to slow down. Naomi's breath caught in her throat. She felt the world tilt on its axis. Evan turned to face the crowd fully, his voice rising with confidence. As though he'd been waiting for this moment. As though humiliating her had been his plan all along. I was forced into this merger marriage by my father. I won't tie myself to someone this fat and embarrassing. Look at her. The world stopped. 300 faces stared back at her. Mouths open in shock. Eyes wide with the gleeful horror of people witnessing a public execution they could share on social media within seconds. Phones rose like a wave across the cathedral, recording, streaming, live streaming, immortalizing her destruction in high definition. The bouquet slipped from Naomi's fingers and hit the marble floor with a soft thud that somehow echoed in the massive space like a death knell. She couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't think past the roaring in her ears, and the way her wedding dress suddenly felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds, dragging her down, suffocating her. Evan's family had orchestrated this marriage 6 months ago to merge his struggling tech startup with her father's established manufacturing empire. She'd agreed because her father was desperate, his company hemorrhaging money after a bad investment. Because she'd believed in second chances and the possibility of growth. Because she'd been foolish enough to think professionalism could evolve into affection. That patience and kindness could win over someone who clearly resented her existence. Evan, she whispered, hating how small her voice sounded in this cavernous space. Hating the tears already gathering in her eyes. Hating herself for hoping. Please don't do this. He turned his back on her deliberately, theatrically, making sure every camera caught the gesture. Someone in the crowd gasped. A woman in the third row whispered something to her companion. Phones continued recording. Naomi felt the weight of 300 judgments crushing down on her shoulders. That's when the voice came from the rear of the cathedral, smooth and deep and precisely controlled, with an accent that shaped each syllable like it was carved from ice. Enough. Every single person in the cathedral turned. A man stood in the doorway, backlit by California sun streaming through stained glass windows. Tall, easily over 6 feet. Dark suit that looked like it cost more than most people's cars, tailored so perfectly it seemed like a second skin. He moved forward with unhurried confidence, and the crowd parted without him saying a word, an instinctive response to whatever energy he radiated. Naomi's vision was still blurred with tears, but she registered details even through her shock. Korean. Beautiful in a way that felt dangerous, like appreciating a predator's grace right before it struck. Sharp jawline that could cut glass. Dark eyes that tracked everything with surgical precision. Hair styled with casual perfection. Presence that commanded the entire space without effort. The guests scrambled aside as he walked down the aisle with measured steps. Several men in expensive suits near the back straightened their jackets suddenly, alert and nervous. One whispered urgently to his companion, his face pale. Another pulled out his phone, not to record, but to make a call, his expression panicked. "She's no longer yours," the stranger said, his gaze fixed on Naomi with an intensity that made her skin prickle and her heart race. Evan scoffed, but Naomi noticed his father had gone completely pale. The older man gripped the edge of the pew in front of him like he needed the support to stay standing. His mother's hand flew to her throat. Several board members from Evan's company looked like they wanted to sink through the floor. "And who are you supposed to be?" Evan asked, trying for dismissive superiority, but achieving only nervous bravado. The stranger finally looked at Evan, and the temperature in the cathedral seemed to drop 10 degrees. People in the front rows actually shivered. "The man who will marry her." The certainty in his voice, the absolute confidence, sent shockwaves through the crowd. Gasps. Confused murmurs. More phones recording. This was no longer just a rejected bride story. This was something else entirely. He closed the distance to the altar in smooth, measured strides, each step radiating controlled power. His shoes made no sound on the marble. When he reached Naomi, standing frozen in her wedding dress with tears streaming down her face, he did something that made her heart stutter and skip and nearly stop. He pulled a white silk handkerchief from his pocket, monogrammed, she noticed distantly, and gently, almost tenderly, wiped a tear from her cheek. The gesture was intimate, possessive, careful, like she was something precious he'd been searching for. "My name is Han Seojin," he said softly, meant only for her ears, his accent wrapping around each word. "You walked away. I stepped forward. And you will never be humiliated again. I promise you this." Naomi stared up at him, her mind racing desperately to process reality. This man was a complete stranger. She'd never seen him before in her life. Never met him at a corporate function or charity event. Never passed him on the street. Yet he spoke with absolute certainty, as though her future had already been decided and filed away in triplicate, signed and notarized. "I don't understand," she whispered, her voice breaking on the last word. "You will." His thumb brushed her cheekbone with devastating gentleness, the gesture intimate and deliberate, staking a claim everyone in the room could see. "I've been watching you for 6 months, Naomi. Learning who you are. Understanding what you need. And today, I'm taking what should have been mine from the beginning." The possessiveness in his words should have terrified her. Should have sent every alarm bell in her head screaming. Instead, they sent a strange thrill down her spine that she absolutely refused to examine in this moment. "But first we're leaving," Han continued, still speaking softly, still maintaining that devastating eye contact. He took her hand, and Naomi felt warmth travel up her arm despite the shock numbing her entire system. His hand was large, warm, surprisingly gentle despite the calluses she could feel on his palm. She should pull away, should demand explanations, should do literally anything except let this stranger lead her away from her own wedding ceremony in front of 300 witnesses. But when Han Seojin turned to face the crowd, his expression shifted into something that made several grown men visibly flinch and step backward. "This event is over," he said quietly, but his voice carried to every corner of the massive cathedral. The acoustics seemed to amplify his words, making them inescapable. "Anyone who posts footage from today will hear from my legal team within the hour. Anyone who speaks to the press about what happened here will discover that I hold grudges and have extensive resources to pursue them. Is that clearly understood?" No one moved. No one dared even whisper. The silence was absolute, suffocating, heavy with fear. His gaze swept across the crowd and landed on Evan's father. The older man looked like he might have a heart attack. "Mr. Hale, your son made a choice today. Now you'll deal with the consequences of his poor judgment and worse manners. My office will contact you Monday morning to discuss the restructuring of your business relationships. I suggest you prepare appropriately." Mr. Hale nodded rapidly, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cathedral's careful climate control. Then Han looked at Evan himself, and his expression went from cold to absolutely glacial. "You walked away from something precious. That was your mistake. Don't compound it by ever speaking her name again." Without waiting for a response, Han guided Naomi down the aisle, his hand steady and sure on hers. She moved on autopilot, her brain unable to catch up with the last 5 minutes of her life. Everything felt surreal, like she was watching herself in a movie, like this was happening to someone else. Guests pressed against the pews to create space for them. Some out of respect, others out of fear. She caught fragments of whispered conversations as they passed. "That's Han Seojin. What is he doing here? Heard he controls entire markets. Dangerous man to cross. Why does he care about?" They stepped through the cathedral doors into blinding California sunlight. The contrast from the dim interior made Naomi blink rapidly. A black sedan waited at the curb, sleek and expensive, engine purring quietly. A driver stood by the open rear door, his expression professionally blank but his posture respectful, almost reverential. Han released her hand only to help her into the car, gathering the elaborate train of her wedding dress with surprising care and skill, making sure none of the expensive fabric caught in the door. Then he slid in beside her with fluid grace, and the door closed with a solid, expensive thunk that shut out the world and all its noise. The driver pulled away smoothly, professionally. Naomi watched the cathedral recede through tinted windows. Her wedding that wasn't, her humiliation broadcast to hundreds of people who would never let her forget, who were probably already posting to social media, already crafting the narrative of the fat bride who got rejected at the altar. The silence in the car stretched. Han didn't push for immediate conversation, didn't demand explanations or gratitude. He just sat there beside her, radiating that same controlled calm that had frozen an entire cathedral full of people, giving her space to process while simultaneously claiming that space as his own. Naomi's mind raced in circles. Who was this man? Why had he intervened? What did he want from her? How did he know her name? What did he mean he'd been watching her for 6 months? That should sound creepy, stalkerish, terrifying. Instead, it sounded like he'd been protecting her from a distance, waiting for the right moment to step forward. Finally, she found her voice, though it came out hoarse and uncertain. Why? Han turned to face her fully, and for the first time since he'd appeared in the cathedral, she saw something other than cold authority in his expression. Not warmth exactly, but something close. Something that looked almost like reverence mixed with possession mixed with something she couldn't quite name. Because 6 months ago, I watched you defend a junior employee in front of your entire department, he said, his voice steady and sure. You risked your position, your professional relationships, possibly your entire career to protect someone who had no power, no influence, no way to protect themselves. Most people in your world don't do that. Most people stay silent, keep their heads down, prioritize their own advancement. But you didn't. Naomi's mind raced backward through the months. 6 months ago, that disastrous meeting where she'd called out a senior manager for stealing credit from a 22-year-old intern who'd stayed up for 3 nights straight working on a presentation. The intern had been too afraid to speak up. Everyone else in that conference room had known what happened but stayed silent. Naomi hadn't been able to stomach it. She'd spoken up, presented evidence, demanded the intern get proper recognition. She'd been written up for insubordination afterward. Her boss had threatened her with termination if she ever disrupted team harmony again. She'd almost been fired for doing the right thing. You were there? She asked, incredulous. At that meeting? I make it my business to notice people worth noticing, Han said, his gaze intense and unwavering. My company was considering a partnership with yours. I attended several meetings as part of due diligence. I saw how you operated, how you treated people, how you gave credit where it was due and stood up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves. He shifted slightly closer, and Naomi found she couldn't look away from his eyes. You've been competent, kind, and quietly brilliant at a company that gave you none of the credit you deserved, Han continued. You mentored junior employees on your own time. You stayed late to help coworkers meet deadlines. You were loyal to people who didn't deserve your loyalty. When I learned about this arranged marriage 3 months ago, I looked into Evan Hale thoroughly. He's weak, cruel, mediocre, unworthy of you in every conceivable way. So you decided to what? Rescue me? Naomi asked, trying to understand his logic, trying to make sense of any of this. No. Han's expression hardened, became more possessive. I decided you were mine. There's a difference. The words should have terrified her. Should have sent her scrambling for the door handle, demanding he stop the car immediately. Instead, they sent a strange, electric thrill down her spine that she absolutely refused to examine or acknowledge. You can't just claim someone like property, Naomi said, forcing strength into her voice despite how it wanted to shake. I'm not something you can decide to own. I know exactly what you are, Han said, his voice dropping lower, becoming almost intimate in the enclosed space. You're someone who deserves better than what you've been given. Someone who deserves protection, respect, appreciation. I'm offering you that. But make no mistake about my intentions. Once I decide something is mine, I don't abandon it. I don't give up. I don't let go. He reached over and took her hand again, his thumb tracing slow, deliberate circles on her palm. The gesture was simultaneously soothing and claiming. That sounds like a threat, Naomi whispered, though she didn't pull her hand away. It's a promise. Han lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to her knuckles without breaking eye contact. The gesture old-fashioned and possessive and devastating. I've been watching you for 6 months, Naomi. Learning your patterns. Understanding what makes you happy, what stresses you, what you need. Today, I'm giving you a choice, but understand the weight of it. Come with me now. Let me protect you from the fallout of what just happened. Step into my world and see what we could build together. Or I'll have my driver take you anywhere you want to go. Your apartment, your father's house, a hotel, another city entirely. But understand this. If you come with me, you're choosing to step into my world. And my world is not safe. It's not simple. But it is mine, and I protect what's mine with everything I have. The sedan glided smoothly through Laguna Bay, past the tourist-packed beaches and upscale restaurants with their outdoor seating and ocean views, climbing steadily into the hills where the real money lived. Naomi had been to this neighborhood once for a corporate function hosted by a tech mogul, and she'd spent the entire evening awed by the casual display of wealth that surrounded her. Estates hidden behind security gates and manicured hedges. Properties that sold for tens of millions of dollars. A world she'd never imagined accessing. They pulled up to a gate that opened automatically before they even stopped, some kind of sensor recognizing the vehicle. The drive wound upward through carefully landscaped grounds, lined with jacaranda trees in full purple bloom. The house, no, estate was far more accurate, came into view gradually. All glass and white stone and clean architectural lines that belonged in luxury. Design magazines. Modern but somehow timeless. Expensive but not ostentatious. Powerful in its restraint. "Is this your home?" Naomi asked, her voice small in the face of such obvious wealth. "One of them," Han said casually, like owning multiple estates was perfectly normal. "The others are in Seoul, Tokyo, and Singapore. But this is where I spend most of my time when I'm in the States. I prefer the ocean. It helps me think." He helped her out of the car with the same careful attention he'd shown at the cathedral, his hand steady at her elbow, making sure she didn't trip on her dress. An older Korean woman appeared at the entrance, bowing deeply when she saw Han. They exchanged rapid Korean, the woman's expression flickering between concern and curiosity as she glanced repeatedly at Naomi. The language was beautiful, musical, and completely incomprehensible to Naomi's ears. "This is Mrs. Kong," Han said, switching smoothly to English. "She's managed my household for 15 years, and is probably the only person in the world I trust completely. She'll help you get comfortable while we figure out next steps." Mrs. Kong smiled warmly, her entire face crinkling with kindness. Her eyes were gentle, concerned, maternal. She gestured for Naomi to follow, speaking in accented but clear English. Come. You need rest. Big shock today, yes? We take care of you." Despite everything, the chaos, the fear, the uncertainty, Naomi felt herself relax slightly at Mrs. Kang's presence. There was something inherently trustworthy about the older woman, something that made Naomi feel safer. Inside, the house was even more stunning than the exterior promised. Minimalist and elegant without being cold. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the Pacific Ocean. The view so spectacular it didn't seem real. Traditional Korean art hung beside modern sculptures, creating a visual conversation between old and new. The juxtaposition felt like Han himself. Controlled elegance barely concealing depths of complexity. Mrs. Kong led her upstairs, chattering gently in a mix of Korean and English, to a bedroom suite that was larger than Naomi's entire apartment. A California king bed with what looked like 1,000 thread count sheets. A walk-in closet the size of her current bedroom. A bathroom with a soaking tub that could easily fit 3 people. And a shower with multiple heads and controls that looked like they required an engineering degree to operate. French doors opened onto a private balcony with stunning ocean views and comfortable seating. "Mr. Han says you rest here," Mrs. Kong said, patting Naomi's arm gently. "I bring tea, yes? And help with dress. Too heavy. Too tight. Not comfortable." Naomi nodded numbly, still processing everything. Mrs. Kong moved with practiced efficiency, helping her out of the elaborate wedding gown. The suffocating corset that had been digging into her ribs all day. The layers upon layers of tulle and silk and embroidered details that had felt like armor this morning, and now just felt like evidence of her monumental failure. Mrs. Kong hung the dress carefully in the closet, handling it with respect despite what it represented. Then she brought out a soft, expensive-looking robe in pale blue, wrapping Naomi in it like a child who needed comfort, adjusting it carefully and tying the belt with gentle hands. She disappeared briefly and returned with an elaborate tea service, pouring something fragrant and steaming into a delicate porcelain cup painted with cherry blossoms. "Drink," she urged gently, pressing the warm cup into Naomi's hands. "Traditional Korean tea. Good for shock. Good for heart. Make you feel better." Naomi obeyed, taking a careful sip. The tea was slightly sweet with hints of honey, floral with undertones of ginger, immediately calming. The warmth spread through her chest, loosening the tight knot of anxiety that had been sitting there since Evan's first cruel words. Mrs. Kong patted her hand, then her cheek with grandmotherly affection, and left quietly, closing the door softly behind her. Alone finally with her thoughts, Naomi walked to the balcony on unsteady legs. The Pacific stretched endlessly before her, waves rolling with hypnotic rhythm. The sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and amber. Salt air filled her lungs, clean and fresh, washing away the lingering scent of the cathedral's incense and flowers. She gripped the railing and let herself feel everything she'd been holding back. The humiliation of Evan's words echoing in that massive space. The betrayal of someone she'd tried so hard to give the benefit of the doubt. The weight of 300 people watching her get destroyed on what should have been the happiest day of her life. What should have been a beginning but had turned into an ending. And underneath all of that, dangerous and insistent and impossible to ignore, a profound curiosity about the man downstairs who'd claimed her like a prize, who spoke about her future as though he'd already written it, who looked at her like she was something precious and worth protecting. A knock at the door pulled her from her spiraling thoughts. She turned, wrapping her arms around herself. "Come in." Han entered, and somehow he looked even more dangerous now than he had at the cathedral. He'd removed his jacket, revealing a crisp white shirt that fit him perfectly, emphasizing broad shoulders and a lean, powerful build. He'd rolled his sleeves to his forearms, revealing tan skin, and the kind of forearms that suggested regular physical training. He'd loosened his tie, somehow slightly undone. He looked even more intimidating, more real, more present. "I thought you might need time alone," he said, leaning against the doorframe with deceptive casualness. "But there are things we should discuss. Things you need to understand before you decide whether to stay or go." "What are you?" Naomi asked bluntly, too exhausted for diplomacy. "Everyone at that wedding was terrified of you. Evan's father looked like he might collapse. The men in suits at the back were making phone calls the second you appeared. Who are you that inspires that kind of fear?" "People fear what they don't understand," Han said, pushing off the doorframe and moving onto the balcony. He stood beside her at the railing but maintained careful distance, respecting her space. "I run a conglomerate based in Seoul, Han Industries. We have interests in technology, real estate, pharmaceutical development, private security, information management. Our operations span Asia, Europe, and North America. The kind of business that solves problems governments can't touch, that operates in spaces where official channels fail." "That sounds incredibly ominous," Naomi said, turning to face him. "Sometimes it is," Han admitted, meeting her gaze directly. "I won't lie to you, Naomi. That's a promise I'm making right now. I will never lie to you. Even when the truth is uncomfortable. I exist in gray spaces between legal and illegal, between right and necessary. I've done things that would make you uncomfortable if you knew the details. I've made choices that can't be unmade. But I have rules that I never break. I don't traffic in drugs or weapons that target civilians. I don't exploit the vulnerable. I protect what's mine. I honor my commitments. And I never, ever abandon something I've chosen, someone I've claimed." His eyes held hers with devastating intensity. "I'm dangerous, Naomi. That's not a boast or an exaggeration. It's a simple fact. But I'm dangerous in controlled ways, for specific purposes. And right now, I'm choosing to use that danger to protect you." "Why me?" Naomi asked again, needing to understand, needing to make sense of this impossible situation. "You could have anyone. You clearly have resources, power, connections. Why go to such elaborate lengths for someone you don't even know? Why interrupt my wedding? Why claim me like I'm yours? What do you actually want?" Han was quiet for a long moment, his gaze drifting to the ocean, watching the waves roll in with the same controlled calm he brought to everything. When he spoke again, his voice carried a weight that made her breath catch and her heart race. "Because in my world, people bow out of fear or greed. They calculate every move, every word, every alliance. They smile while planning betrayals. They take what they can get and give as little as possible in return. It's exhausting. It's lonely. It's empty." He looked at her again, and something in his expression shifted, became more vulnerable. "But you? You give without being asked. You defend people who can't defend themselves. You stayed kind and generous in a place specifically designed to make you cruel and selfish. You chose integrity over advancement. That's remarkable. That's rare. That's worth protecting. He reached out slowly, giving her plenty of time to move away, and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear with careful fingers. You defended someone who couldn't defend themselves, someone who had no power or influence, he continued softly. You stood up for what was right even when it cost you professionally. That matters to me more than you can possibly understand. That kind of person is worth knowing, worth protecting, worth claiming if she'll allow it. Naomi's heart hammered against her ribs so hard she thought he might be able to hear it. This man was dangerous, clearly powerful in ways she didn't fully understand, operating in worlds she'd never glimpsed. And he was absolutely sincere in every word he spoke. She could see it in his eyes, hear it in his voice, feel it in the careful way he touched her. What happens now? She whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of waves. Now you decide, Han said, stepping back deliberately, creating physical space between them. You can stay here as long as you need. This room is yours. The house is yours. Tomorrow, I'll have my lawyers file paperwork to nullify your arrangement with the Hales. I'll make sure you're protected from media fallout. Every video will be taken down. Every malicious comment will be addressed. Every attempt to make you a public joke will be shut down immediately. Your father's company will experience no negative consequences from today's events. I'll personally guarantee the manufacturing contracts he was depending on through the merger. Beyond that, the choice is entirely yours. And if I choose to leave? Naomi asked, needing to know the boundaries, needing to understand if this was really a choice or just the illusion of one. Something painful flickered across Han's face. Raw hurt that he quickly controlled, but not before she saw it. Pain maybe. Or resignation. Or loss of something he'd hoped for. Then I'll arrange transportation to wherever you want to go, he said, his voice carefully neutral. No strings. No obligations. No consequences. I'll still take care of the legal issues and protect you from the media, but you'll be free to build whatever life you want, wherever you want to build it. He meant it. Naomi could tell with absolute certainty. For all his talk of claiming her, of deciding she was his, he was genuinely giving her the freedom to walk away. That contradiction, the possessive certainty paired with genuine choice, made him more intriguing, more complicated, more real. That's what made staying dangerous. Not his power or his wealth or his admitted moral ambiguity, but the fact that he was offering her something that looked like care wrapped in control, devotion packaged with danger. I need time to think, she said quietly. This is all happening so fast. 6 hours ago I was getting ready for my wedding. Now I'm in a stranger's house wearing a borrowed robe, and trying to process the worst and weirdest day of my entire life. Han nodded, accepting her boundary without argument. Take all the time you need. There's no pressure, no timeline. Mrs. Kong will bring you dinner in a few hours. If you need anything at all, just ask. There's an intercom system in the room, or you can text her directly. He pulled out his phone, typed quickly, and Naomi's phone buzzed in her clutch on the dresser. I just sent you Mrs. Kang's contact information and mine. Call or text anytime, day or night. He moved toward the door with that same fluid grace, then paused and turned back. For what it's worth, I'm sorry you were hurt today, he said, and the sincerity in his voice was unmistakable. You deserved better than Evan Hale. You deserved someone who saw your value, who recognized what they had, who would have been honored to stand beside you. His failure to appreciate you is his loss, and if you'll allow it, my gain. Then he was gone, the door closing softly behind him, leaving Naomi alone with the ocean view and her chaotic thoughts and the rapidly sinking sun painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold. She stayed on the balcony until full darkness fell, watching lights flicker on in the distant houses dotting the hillside like earthbound stars. Her phone, still in her clutch from the wedding, buzzed repeatedly. Text messages. Phone calls. Social media notifications exploding as footage from the cathedral spread across the internet like wildfire. As people who'd never met her formed opinions about her body, her worth, her failures. She turned it off without reading any of it. She wasn't ready. Maybe tomorrow. Maybe never. Mrs. Kong brought dinner on an elaborate tray, and Naomi was surprised to find herself hungry despite everything. Simple, perfectly prepared Korean dishes she'd never tried, but found herself devouring. Comfort food in a language she didn't speak. Prepared by a woman whose eyes held only kindness and no judgment whatsoever. That night, lying in sheets that smelled like lavender and expensive detergent, Naomi lay awake and replayed every moment. Evan's cruelty. The gasps. The phones recording her humiliation. Her own frozen paralysis. And Han Seojin. Appearing like something from a drama, rewriting her disaster into something else entirely. A rescue or a claiming or maybe both at once. She should be planning her escape. Should be calling her father, though he'd probably had a heart attack when the wedding imploded. Should be calling friends, though most of them had been in that cathedral watching her get destroyed. Should be doing something productive instead of lying here in a stranger's house wondering what it would be like to stay. Instead, she found herself replaying the way Han had looked at her. Like she mattered. Like she was precious. Like he'd been waiting 6 months for the right moment to step forward and claim what he'd decided was his. It should terrify her. It probably would tomorrow, in the bright light of day, when she could think more clearly. Tonight, exhausted and emotionally destroyed and weirdly safe in this beautiful house, she let herself wonder what it would be like to be claimed by someone who looked at her the way Han Seojin did. Morning came with soft golden light and the eternal sound of waves. Naomi woke disoriented, momentarily forgetting where she was, reaching for her alarm clock that wasn't there. Then memory crashed back like a wave, and she groaned into the pillow, pulling it over her face. Yesterday had really happened. All of it. The wedding, the rejection, the humiliation, the stranger who'd claimed her. It wasn't a nightmare she could wake up from. A gentle knock at the door pulled her from her spiral. Mrs. Kong entered with a gentle smile, carrying a tray with coffee that smelled like heaven and a selection of pastries that looked professionally made. "Good morning," she said cheerfully, setting the tray on the bedside table. "You sleep okay? Mr. Han says you joined him for breakfast, yes? On terrace. Beautiful morning. Good for talking." Naomi nodded, accepting the coffee gratefully. The first sip was perfect, strong but not bitter, with exactly the right amount of cream even though she hadn't specified. Han had done his research thoroughly if he knew how she took her coffee. She showered quickly in the elaborate bathroom, grateful to wash away the hairspray residue and makeup from yesterday that had survived the night. In the walk-in closet, she found clothes in her exact size, tags still attached. Expensive brands she recognized but could never afford. Jeans that fit perfectly. Soft cashmere sweaters. Casual wear that was somehow both comfortable and elegant. She chose simple dark jeans and a cream-colored sweater, trying desperately not to think too hard about the implications of him knowing not just her size but her measurements, her style preferences, her preferred fabrics. The terrace overlooked the ocean, the morning light making the water sparkle like scattered diamonds. Han sat at a beautifully set table, reading something on a tablet, dressed casually in dark slacks and a white linen shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows. He looked up when she approached, and his entire face transformed. Not quite a smile, but something close. Something warm that made her stomach flip. He stood immediately, pulling out a chair for her with old-fashioned courtesy. "Good morning. I hope you slept better than I expected you would." "Better than I thought I would," Naomi admitted, taking the seat. "Thank you for all of this. The room, the clothes, the privacy. You don't need to thank me for basic decency." Han settled back into his own chair. "Though I appreciate the courtesy." Breakfast was laid out beautifully, American options and Korean dishes, both fresh fruit, pastries, everything prepared to perfection. They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes, Naomi's mind racing with questions she wasn't sure how to ask. "I had my lawyers file paperwork first thing this morning," Han said finally, setting down his coffee cup. "Emergency motions. The marriage contract between you and the Hale family is void as of 7 a.m. Your father's company will experience no negative consequences whatsoever. In fact, I've personally guaranteed the manufacturing contracts he was depending on through the merger. Better contracts, actually, with more favorable terms and longer commitment periods. He'll be in a stronger position than before." Naomi's head snapped up. "Why would you do that? My father's problems aren't your responsibility." "Because your father's desperation forced you into an impossible situation. That's not your burden to carry." Han's tone was matter-of-fact, as though casually saving entire companies was just part of his Tuesday routine. I also took care of the social media situation. My team had all the wedding footage scrubbed from every platform by midnight. We sent cease and desist letters to everyone who recorded. Anyone who tries to repost it will face immediate legal action, and, if necessary, more creative forms of discouragement. We've also flooded the algorithms with counter-narratives, and had the major platforms flag any content from yesterday as harassment. You can't just erase the internet, Naomi protested weakly, even as part of her desperately wanted him to be right. No, I can't erase it completely, Han agreed. But I can make it very expensive and legally complicated to spread content I object to. I can make platforms prioritize taking it down. I can make it socially unacceptable to share or discuss. And I can make sure that anyone searching your name finds carefully curated, positive information instead of yesterday's disaster. By the end of the week, what happened at that cathedral will be a footnote that most people won't even remember. The casual certainty in his voice sent shivers down her spine. This man didn't make promises he couldn't keep. He simply rearranged reality to match his will, deployed resources most people couldn't even imagine, and expected results. What do you want from me? Naomi asked, needing to understand the transaction, needing to know what she was agreeing to if she stayed. Nobody does this much for a stranger without expecting something in return. So what is it? What do you actually want? Han set down his tablet and leaned forward slightly, his full attention focused on her with that same devastating intensity from yesterday. I want you to stay, he said simply. Not as obligation or debt or gratitude, but because you choose to. Because you see what we could build together and decide it's worth exploring. And then what? What does that look like practically? Then we see what develops. He reached across the table, his hand open, palm up, an invitation rather than a demand. I'm not asking you to love me, Naomi. I'm not asking you to marry me tomorrow or commit to forever right now. I'm asking you to give me the chance to earn your trust, your respect, and eventually, if I'm very lucky and work very hard, your affection. Her hand moved before her brain could overthink it, sliding across the table into his. His fingers closed around hers immediately, warm and certain and gentle. I'm dangerous, Han continued, his voice dropping lower, becoming more serious. I need you to understand that clearly. My business puts me in situations most people never see. I have enemies, powerful people who would love to see me fail, organizations that view me as a threat, competitors who play ruthlessly. If you stay, if you become important to me publicly, you become a potential target. I can protect you better than almost anyone on earth, but I can't make it completely safe. There will always be risk. Is that supposed to convince me to stay? Naomi asked, but she didn't pull her hand away from his. It's supposed to be honest, Han said, his thumb tracing slow patterns on her palm. I could lie. I could tell you it's all perfectly safe, that my world is just business meetings and charity galas and nothing darker. But you deserve the truth, even when it's uncomfortable. Especially when it's uncomfortable. You've been lied to enough for one lifetime. Naomi thought about her options, really considered them. She could leave right now. Take whatever money she had saved, find a new city, start over completely. Try to rebuild her life alone. Face the wreckage of yesterday by herself. Process the trauma and humiliation in isolation. Or she could stay with this beautiful, dangerous man who looked at her like she was something precious and rare. Who'd gone to extraordinary lengths to protect her. Who offered her honesty even when dishonesty would be easier. Who gave her choice even while admitting he desperately wanted her to choose him. I'll stay, she heard herself say, the words coming out steady and sure. For now. But I need ground rules. Clear boundaries that we both respect. Han's expression brightened in a way that made him look almost boyish. Decades of control and careful distance dropping away for just a moment. Name them. Whatever you need. You don't make decisions about my life without asking me first, Naomi said firmly. You don't erase people who inconvenience me without my explicit permission. You don't use your resources to solve my problems unless I specifically request help. And you tell me the truth, always, even when it's ugly or complicated or makes you look bad. Done, Han said immediately, squeezing her hand. Anything else? Yes. Naomi met his gaze squarely, needing him to understand this completely. If I choose to leave, if I wake up one day and decide this isn't working, that I can't handle your world or don't want to be part of it, you let me go, no matter how you feel about it. No following me, no protecting me from a distance without my consent, no using your resources to keep tabs on me. You let me go completely. Something painful and raw flickered across Han's face. He looked like she'd struck him, like she'd reached into his chest and squeezed his heart. But after a long moment, he nodded slowly. If that's what you truly want, if you genuinely decide you need to leave, I won't stop you, he said quietly. I'll hate it. It will probably destroy me. But I'll respect your choice because that's what you deserve. The freedom to make your own decisions about your own life. The vulnerability in his admission, the raw honesty, made Naomi's chest tighten with unexpected emotion. The days that followed took on a surreal, almost dreamlike quality. Han gave her space but remained consistently present, never pushing for more than she was ready to give, always available but never overwhelming. They had breakfast together every morning on that terrace, watching the sunrise paint the ocean in changing colors. He'd tell her about his day in carefully vague terms, respecting her request not to burden her with details she wasn't ready for. She'd talk about the books she was reading from his extensive library, the walks she took along the private beach below the estate, the conversations she had with Mrs. Kong about Korean cooking and culture. Mrs. Kong doted on her like a favorite grandchild, teaching her Korean phrases with patience and humor, insisting she eat more at every meal, sharing stories about Han's childhood that made him seem more human and less like some untouchable figure of power. The small household staff, a housekeeper, a gardener, the driver from that first day, treated her with quiet, respectful warmth, as though her presence here was already established fact rather than temporary experiment. Han's world revealed itself gradually, in carefully controlled glimpses. Important-looking men in expensive dark suits who arrived for meetings in his home office, speaking in multiple languages, their body language deferential and slightly nervous. Phone calls he took while pacing the terrace, his voice dropping into different registers depending on who was on the other end, commanding with some, conciliatory with others, absolutely lethal with a select few. The way certain news stories made his jaw tighten and his eyes go cold. Though he never explained why unless she specifically asked. She learned to read his moods in subtle cues. The tension in his shoulders when a deal was going badly. The slight smile when something pleased him. The way his eyes would track her across a room. Always aware of where she was, always oriented toward her even when he was focused on something else. One evening, 2 weeks after the wedding that wasn't, Naomi found Han in his office late at night. City lights twinkling through the floor-to-ceiling windows behind him like a constellation brought to earth. He looked exhausted in a way she hadn't seen before, shoulders tight with tension, jaw clenched, the tablet in front of him displaying what looked like financial reports or legal documents. "Bad day?" she asked from the doorway, genuinely concerned. He looked up, and some of the tension visibly eased when he saw her. "Nothing I can't handle. Just complicated. Come in, please. I could use the distraction." Naomi crossed to his desk, perching on the edge of it in what had become a comfortable habit. It was the closest they'd been since that first day, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something subtle and expensive, and see the faint shadows under his eyes that suggested he hadn't been sleeping well. "Tell me something real," she said softly. "About your business. About why people are afraid of you. I've been here 2 weeks, and I still don't really understand what you do beyond vague descriptions of solving problems." Han studied her for a long moment, clearly weighing how much to share, how much truth she could handle. "Are you sure you want to know? Some things can't be unknown once you learn them." "I'm staying in your house, eating your food, wearing clothes you bought me, accepting your protection," Naomi said. "I should probably understand who you are and what you're capable of. Really understand it, not just accept careful euphemisms." He nodded slowly, accepting her logic. "I solve problems for people who have no other options. A businessman being blackmailed by a competitor with damaging information. A family being extorted by organized crime. A government official who needs intelligence that doesn't officially exist and can't be obtained through normal channels. I provide solutions that exist outside legal frameworks, outside traditional power structures. That sounds like organized crime, Naomi said carefully, trying to process this without judgment. Sometimes the line is very blurry, Han admitted with brutal honesty. I operate in gray spaces between legal and illegal, between moral and necessary. I've bribed officials, destroyed evidence, ruined careers, dismantled organizations. I've used blackmail, leverage, and carefully applied pressure to achieve outcomes my clients need. That doesn't make it legal. It doesn't make it clean. But it's what I am, what I've built. He waited, clearly expecting her to recoil, to realize what she'd gotten herself into and run. Instead, Naomi asked, "The meeting you're stressed about tonight. What's the problem?"
Han blinked, surprised by her calm acceptance.
A client's daughter is being stalked by an ex-boyfriend. The police can't help because he hasn't technically broken any laws yet. He's careful to stay just inside legal boundaries. But he's escalating. Showing up at her workplace, her gym, her favorite restaurants. Sending gifts and messages that toe the line between romantic and threatening. It's only a matter of time before he does something that can't be undone. "So you'll stop him first," Naomi said, understanding the logic even if it existed outside normal rules. "Yes. We'll make it very clear that continuing his current behavior will have consequences he doesn't want to experience. Usually that's enough. People respond well to understanding the true cost of their actions." "Will you hurt him?" Naomi asked directly, needing to know the limits, the boundaries of what Han was capable of. "Only if absolutely necessary to protect the client's daughter," Han said, his voice steady. "Usually, people respond to information. We show them what we know about their lives, their finances, their secrets, their vulnerabilities. We make it clear that we're watching and capable of dismantling everything they've built if they continue. Most people fold immediately. Violence is expensive, messy, and draws attention I don't want. It's always a last resort." "Then no," Naomi said after a moment of genuine consideration. "It doesn't bother me. You're protecting someone who needs protection from someone who's terrorizing her. The fact that you're doing it outside official channels doesn't make it wrong." Han stood abruptly, moving around the desk to stand directly in front of her. His expression intense and searching. "You should be horrified. Most people would be running for the door right now." "I'm not most people," Naomi said, looking up at him steadily. "You protected me when no one else did. You've been nothing but honest about who you are and what you're capable of. You've given me choice and freedom even though it clearly costs you. Why would I judge you for protecting someone else who needs it?" Han's hand came up to cup her face, his touch gentle despite the calluses she could feel on his palm. Despite the strength she knew he possessed. "You're remarkable," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "Absolutely remarkable." Then he kissed her. Soft at first, questioning, giving her every possible opportunity to pull away or reject him. When she didn't, when she leaned into him instead and brought her hands up to rest against his chest, the kiss deepened. His other hand slid to her waist, pulling her closer, and Naomi wrapped her arms around his neck, letting herself get lost in the moment. She tasted coffee and something uniquely him, felt the controlled strength in how he held her, like she was simultaneously precious and necessary, fragile and essential. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Han rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that since I first saw you defend that intern 6 months ago," he admitted, his voice low and intimate. 6 months is a very long time to wait," Naomi said, her voice shaky, her heart racing. "You were engaged. Then you were healing from trauma." His thumb brushed her cheek with devastating gentleness. "I would have waited 6 years if that's what you needed. I would have waited forever." They stayed like that for a long moment, wrapped in each other, the city lights sparkling behind them like witness to something significant shifting between them. 3 weeks later, Naomi's phone rang with a number she recognized and had been dreading. Evan. She stared at the screen for a long moment, debating whether to answer, whether engaging with him would undo any of the healing she'd managed. Finally, curiosity and a need for closure won out. "Hello. Naomi." Evan's voice sounded strained, stressed, Nothing like his usual confident arrogance. I need to talk to you. In person. Please. I don't think that's a good idea, Naomi said carefully, keeping her voice neutral. Please, he said again, and he actually sounded desperate. I need to apologize properly. Face to face. Not over the phone like a coward. You deserve that much at least. Naomi found Han in the gym, working through what looked like a brutal training session with a heavy bag. He moved with precision and power, each strike controlled and devastating. He glanced over when she entered, immediately picking up on her tension despite her attempt to appear calm. What's wrong? He asked, catching the bag mid-swing. Evan called. He wants to meet. To apologize in person. Han's expression went deadly cold in an instant, the temperature in the room seeming to drop. Absolutely not. I wasn't asking permission, Naomi said, keeping her voice calm but firm. But I am telling you about it, being honest like we agreed. They stared at each other, the first real conflict between them crackling in the air like static electricity. Finally, Han grabbed a towel and wiped his face, his jaw tight. If you're going to see him, I'm coming with you, he said, his tone leaving absolutely no room for argument. That's non-negotiable. Han. Non-negotiable, he repeated, his eyes intense. You want to face him, fine. That's your choice and I'll support it. But I won't let you do it alone. He's already hurt you once. I won't give him the opportunity to do it again. They met Evan at a coffee shop in neutral territory, a busy place with lots of witnesses. Both Naomi and Han arrived together, Han's hand steady and possessive at the small of her back. Evan's eyes widened when he saw Han, and genuine fear flashed across his face, quickly suppressed but unmistakable. They sat outside at a table far from other patrons, the autumn air cool and crisp. Evan couldn't seem to stop fidgeting with his cup, his confidence from the wedding completely absent. I'm sorry, he said finally, the words tumbling out in a rush. What I did at the wedding was unforgivable. I was angry about the arrangement, about feeling trapped, but that's no excuse whatsoever. You didn't deserve that humiliation. You didn't deserve any of what I did to you. Naomi waited silently. There had to be more. People didn't grovel without reason. My father's business is failing, Evan continued, not meeting her eyes. Contracts have been cancelled without explanation. Long-term partners have backed out of deals. Our stock price has tanked. We're hemorrhaging money and can't figure out why. I know that's your doing. This last part was directed at Han, who said absolutely nothing, his expression unreadable, his presence radiating controlled threat. And you want me to ask him to stop, Naomi said flatly, understanding the real purpose of this meeting. I want to make this right, Evan said, finally looking at her with something that might have been genuine regret. Tell me what I can do. Please. I'll do anything.
Naomi glanced at Han.
He sat completely still, a predator waiting for her signal, ready to attack or retreat based entirely on what she wanted. She realized with sudden, crystal clarity that he would do whatever she asked. If she wanted Evan's business destroyed completely, Han would do it without hesitation. If she wanted him left alone, Han would pull back immediately. The power was intoxicating and terrifying in equal measure. You humiliated me in front of 300 people, Naomi said quietly, her voice steady. You called me fat and embarrassing on what was supposed to be my wedding day. You shattered any illusion I had that arranged marriages could work, that professional partnerships could evolve into something real. You made me doubt myself and my worth. Evan flinched with each word, shrinking into himself. But you're not worth my energy, Naomi continued, feeling stronger with each word. You're not worth his time or resources. You're just a weak man who hurt someone because he could, because he thought there would be no consequences. So I'll ask him to leave your business alone. Not because you deserve mercy or forgiveness, but because I'm choosing to move forward with my life instead of looking backward at my mistakes. She stood, and Han rose immediately with her, his hand finding hers. Stay away from her, Han said to Evan, his voice soft and absolutely lethal. If I see you near her again, if I hear you've spoken her name in any context, if you so much as think too hard in her direction, what I've done to your business will seem kind and gentle compared to what comes next. Do we understand each other? Evan nodded rapidly, looking like he might be sick. In the car driving back to the estate, Han took her hand, bringing it to his lips. That was generous of you. It was practical, Naomi said, lacing her fingers through his. Revenge would have tied me to him forever, kept him relevant in my life. This way, he's just a bad memory that fades over time. Han lifted her hand to his lips again, kissing her knuckles with old-fashioned reverence. Brilliant and kind. Dangerous combination. Says the man who threatened to destroy someone's entire life for me. I meant every single word, Han said, his eyes meeting hers with fierce intensity. I will always be dangerous for you, Naomi. It's the only way I know how to protect what matters. The only way I know how to show what you mean to me. That night, lying in bed in what had become her room in Han's house, Naomi finally admitted the truth to herself. The truth she'd been avoiding for weeks. She wasn't staying because she had nowhere else to go. She wasn't staying out of gratitude or obligation or fear of facing the world alone. She was staying because she was falling in love with a man who looked at her like she hung the moon and would burn down the world to keep her safe. It was terrifying. It was probably unwise. It complicated everything. But it was real, and it was hers, and it was worth the risk. The next morning, she found Han on the terrace as usual, sunrise painting the ocean in shades of gold. But instead of taking her regular seat across from him, she moved to stand behind him, wrapping her arms around his shoulders from behind in an embrace. He froze for just a moment, surprised, then relaxed completely into her touch. Stay with me, he said quietly, his hands coming up to cover hers. Not as a guest. Not as someone I'm protecting. As mine. Naomi pressed a kiss to his temple, breathing in his scent. I'm already yours, she whispered. I have been since you wiped my tears at that altar. I just needed time to admit it. Han turned in her arms, pulling her into his lap, his eyes searching her face with desperate hope. You're sure? You understand what you're choosing. I've never been more sure of anything in my entire life. He kissed her then, deep and claiming and tender all at once, pouring everything he felt into the connection. When they broke apart, both breathless and shaking, Han rested his forehead against hers. I need you to understand something, he said seriously, his voice rough. Once I commit to you completely, once I allow myself to love you without restraint, I won't be able to let go. Even if you want me to. I'll try, because I promise to respect your choices. But it will destroy me. It will break something fundamental in who I am. Then don't let go, Naomi whispered against his lips. Hold on as tight as you need to. I'm not going anywhere. I'm choosing you, choosing this, choosing us. Relief and joy and something fiercer flooded his expression. I love you, he said, the words sounding like a vow, like a promise, like something sacred. I have from the first moment I saw you stand up for someone who couldn't stand up for themselves. I will until I stop breathing. Possibly longer. I love you too, Naomi said, meaning it completely. My dangerous, overprotective Korean billionaire, who rewrote my entire life. You're everything, Han corrected softly, his arms tightening around her. If you'll have me. If you'll accept all the complications and dangers and difficulties that come with my world. I will. I do. I choose you. 6 months later, Naomi stood in a different cathedral, this one in Seoul, soaring and modern and absolutely breathtaking. She wore a different dress, traditional Korean hanbok in her chosen ceremony, Western gown for the reception, and held different flowers. Han waited at the altar in traditional Korean formal wear, looking devastating and powerful and completely focused on her. His eyes tracking her every step down the aisle with the same intensity as that first day. But this time, when they said their vows in Korean and English both, it was real. Chosen. Wanted. This time, when they kissed as the officiant pronounced them married, 300 different guests cheered with genuine joy. This time, there was no humiliation, no rejection, no betrayal. Just a woman who'd been rescued and a man who'd done the rescuing, both choosing each other with clear eyes and open hearts and absolute certainty. Mrs. Kong cried in the front row, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. Naomi's father beamed, his business not just surviving but thriving under Han's protection and guidance. Even the business associates who feared Han seemed genuinely happy for them, though they still straightened their jackets instinctively when he looked their way. At the reception, Han pulled Naomi close during their first dance. The lights dimmed, the world narrowing to just the two of them. "No regrets," he murmured against her ear. "Not one," Naomi said, looking up at him. This complicated, dangerous, devoted man who'd become her entire world. "You. Only that I didn't claim you sooner," Han said, his arms tightening around her possessively. "But we have time now. All the time in the world. Forever, if I have anything to say about it." And they did. Naomi opened her consulting business 3 months after the wedding, helping companies implement ethical practices, protect whistleblowers, and create cultures where people like that intern she'd defended could thrive. Han funded it without hesitation, used his extensive connections to open doors that would have stayed closed, and stood beside her at every major presentation and pitch. She built something real, something meaningful, something entirely hers. She navigated his world with increasing grace and confidence, learning which questions not to ask, which associates to smile at and which to avoid, which situations required her presence and which required her absence. She met the people he protected, saw the good his dangerous work accomplished, understood the weight he carried and chose to help him carry it. And Han, for his part, learned to loosen his grip gradually, to let her make choices he didn't agree with, to trust that she wouldn't break, that she was stronger than he feared, to accept that loving someone meant giving them the freedom to potentially hurt you, and choosing to take that risk anyway. They fought sometimes, fierce arguments about his overprotectiveness or her stubbornness or the gray moral spaces he operated in. But they always came back together, both of them choosing each other again and again, reaffirming their commitment through conflict and resolution. One evening, a year after their wedding, they sat on the same terrace where they'd had breakfast that first morning after he'd claimed her. The sun set over the Pacific in impossible colors, amber and crimson and gold, and the world felt perfect despite all its complications. "Do you ever miss your old life?" Han asked, his arm around her shoulders, his voice genuinely curious. Naomi considered the question seriously, giving it the weight it deserved. Her old apartment with its peeling paint and broken heater. Her corporate job where she was undervalued and overlooked. The safe, predictable routine that had felt comfortable even as it slowly suffocated her ambitions and dreams. "No," she said honestly, leaning into his warmth. "That life was safe, comfortable in its way, small and predictable. This one is complicated and scary and sometimes overwhelming. But it's absolutely worth it. You're worth it. What we've built is worth every difficulty." Han pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her hair. "You make me better," he said quietly, vulnerability threading through his voice. "Less ruthless, more willing to consider consequences beyond just achieving goals. More human, more connected. I was powerful before you, but I was also isolated. You changed that." "You make me braver," Naomi countered, tilting her head to look up at him. "Strong enough to take up space in rooms where I used to make myself invisible. Bold enough to demand what I deserve instead of accepting whatever people decided to give me. You taught me my own worth." They sat in comfortable silence as stars began to appear overhead, two people who should never have met but couldn't imagine life apart now. Naomi didn't marry a savior. She married a Korean man powerful enough to destroy worlds who chose instead to protect hers, who gave her the freedom to be strong and the safety to be vulnerable, who loved her with the same fierce intensity he brought to everything else in his life, and she loved him back with equal ferocity. This woman who'd been rejected at an altar and claimed by a stranger and transformed into someone who knew her own worth, who demanded respect, who built something meaningful with her second chance. Together, they built something rare and precious. Not safe. It could never be entirely safe when you loved someone who lived in shadows and operated in gray spaces. But real. Fierce. True. Theirs. So what do you think? If love came wrapped in danger and devotion, if someone powerful enough to rewrite your entire world chose to protect you instead of control you, would you run? Or would you stay? Drop your answer in the comments below. And if Han Seojin made your heart race even a little, if you felt Naomi's journey, then make sure you're subscribed to Afro-Korean Story Vault, the hub of great stories, with that notification bell on. Smash that like button. Share this with someone who loves a good romance with an edge. I'll see you in the next story.